Now, David, some viewers on platforms other than YouTube may have just experienced a little technical snafu, but I think we've got it straightened out. I'm hopeful that this video is going to start playing on YouTube for us here so that our viewers will be able to enjoy. And here we go. We're live, and that should work out for everybody. David, how are you today?
I'm very well, Jason.
We've got a lot to discuss, and I want to share some just some logistical things with you before we get into today's topic. And I also want to share with our audience, normally you and I are engaged in a process where we have a conversation, we go through ideas, we have a little back and forth about the title. You're going to explain to us later what you mean by "Do Trudeau BRICS Maximus criminals play the BBC Superspreader-Century game?" That's going to be the focus of today's show. But I just want to let people know a couple things that are going on. The Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channels have been under a steady assault. And I think, David, most people know that I've returned to New York now. I've been on my road trip, and we did a bunch of shows while I was there. I don't know if you had opportunity to see this video of my automobile accident, which cut the road trip short. I don't know if I've revealed this to the audience prior to right now, David, but let me first run this for you, because a lot of people have told me they feel like the individual who rear-ended my car did it deliberately. I don't know that we have any way of knowing that, but let me run this video and you tell me what you think.
You fucking asshole.
So people feel like, that's my commentary on his driving skills. People feel like the guy sped up to crash into me. I'm pretty sure he was just a dope, not paying attention, probably looking at his phone or whatever it is. The thing that's a little disconcerting about it, David, it almost seems like he was accelerating and stepping on the brakes at the same time. Some people have questioned why I was slowing down. Obviously, you're on the highway and cars in front of you slow down. You're forced to slow down, and the hope is that people are paying attention and that they'll stop rather than crash into you. The reason I wanted to show you this video, David, is that I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said something to me that was a little bit upsetting. That automobile crash happened on my birthday. And this individual told me that he had the unfortunate circumstance to come in contact with someone in organized crime who was trying to threaten him to get him to do something. And he told him that the way that it would work is that they would break his leg on his birthday. And then next year on his birthday, they would break his arm. And that was the thing, to attack somebody on their birthday as some form of message. I'm not saying that's what happened, but the fact that this got said to me last night and you hadn't seen the automobile accident, I wanted to show you. The Crowdsource the Truth social media properties have also been under steady attack. So people are hopefully watching us right now on the new YouTube channel, Crowdsource the Truth Forever. And people can find that by going onto YouTube and just subscribing to the channel here. And this is really a frustrating circumstance, David, because as people have to search around the internet to find our videos, you can see we've got substantially fewer viewers. We have about 1/10 to 1/50th of the viewers we would normally have, and the channel currently only has 238 subscribers. So I hope that people will join us on Crowdsource the Truth Forever. People can also visit David's webpage at reversecciscripts.com. But let's get into today's topic, if we can, David, about the BRICS nations and everything that you want to share with us.
Okay, can you just go back to the pictures of the big map that's on the front page of my Reverse CSI? Because I just want to give the listeners a quick historical perspective. Now, this is a map that shows the all red line, which is the copper cable carrying telegraph signals around the British Empire, if you will. Excluding the United States, because let's say we lost it in 1776, but I'm not sure that Americans understand what happened in 1776 to the extent that maybe the British would like to keep from them. But so you can see that the all red line connects up New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom and Canada. And in World War II, of course, these these four countries were joined with the United States to create the Five Eyes Signals Intelligence Network, that it was said was the most powerful signals intelligence network in the world. But the president of China has said that if the Five Eyes continue to interfere in the Hong Kong situation, their eyes will be plucked. Well, Americans, New Zealanders, Australians, United Kingdom, the Brits and Canadians, your eyes have been plucked. And that rhymes with something else, but I don't want to be crude. Now, who plucked them? Well, let's do a little history. In that title, I refer to the BBC's Superspreader-Century game. And I'd like to say that we, the people, and that's the people of the Five Eyes countries and Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they all have a right to, I believe, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is the American dream. But many of them live in countries where that is not possible. So what do I mean by a super spreader century game? Well, I believe it's the connection between the 1918 Spanish flu, which is a misnomer because my understanding is that it's not a Spanish flu so much as a Kentucky flu.
Right.
But maybe that's to be explored. But it is said that the virus that lay behind the 1980 flu was conceived, if you will, and incubated at a training facility for young American US Army soldiers prior to them being shipped abroad in a troop ship, arriving in Bordeaux and spreading the virus from there, which killed 50 to 60 million people, which is an interesting figure because when Bill Gates launched his, how shall I put it, his desktop exercise with a virtual virus at the Hotel Pierre Hotel in New York at the event 201, the simulation for a virtual virus was to cause over 18 months of computer time, 60 million dead. Now, that's kind of interesting. That was launched. That was launched on the 18th of October, 2019, the same day that the Wuhan military games in China were launched, where a Canadian contingent apparently complained of flu-like symptoms consistent with COVID-19. Now, the year before, that's 2018, the BBC had launched a documentary called Contagion! Which was a simulation with a virtual virus that would jump from cell phone to cell phone, depending on the length of time that you might spend in the proximity of a potential infectee. Now, that 2018 documentary was, now dare I say it, I believe, from the BB's point of view, a celebration of the 1918 pandemic.
Why
now,
do you say that?
do I say I'm just going to come to that. It depends on the point of view of the BBC. If the inner party, and those are the words of George Orwell, remember you and I were outside the BBC broadcasting house in January of last year, which was an epic trip. We got some great footage. Yeah. That's where George Orwell worked. In fact, he worked frequently at meetings in room 101. Now, the inner party, outer party, proletariat structure to society was what he indicated in his book, 1984, published in 1949. And I don't think that he invented anything in that book. I think he was describing an existing situation. That with the BBC and the inner party, they were creating a global, non-ideological philosophy, if you will, to maintain absolute power for the inner party, that's the 2%, to maintain complete control and surveillance over the outer party, which are the people who would like to become the inner party, and ignore the proletariat, except other than to treat the proletariat as expendables, to be quite frequently eliminated on the grounds that these people believe in population control. So now let's just flick to, since you're there at the BBC, why don't we just look at a couple of statues that I think are extremely indicative, right?
Well, the
That
first one I wanted
out-
to show everybody, David, is the George Orwell, but
Okay,
it seems like
all
it's
right.
not letting me go there for some reason. Isn't it
Well, if
over
you go
here?
into that tunnel on the right, of course, you have George Orwell's comment: "Is freedom is the
It
liberty
no
to
longer lets us
speak."
go there
All right.
for
Well, they
some
might
reason.
be slowing us down a little bit, right? But
Let's see.
anyway, the bearded man
There we
holding
go.
the naked boy between his legs, apparently.
Sorry,
And
David. I don't mean to whip you around,
okay,
but
yeah,
we've
yeah,
got our
okay,
way in here to show George Orwell.
okay.
So this is where we were. This is where his statue is, and this is where he tells everybody that liberty means, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. Let's just focus on that for a moment, David, because when we tell people things that YouTube doesn't want them to hear, we don't have that right. YouTube takes away our voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the BBC now straddles. It was formed on the 18th of October, 1922.
Wait a minute, what?
Now, you remember you talked about that collision on your birthday. These scumbags like to attach something symbolic that really frightens people with a threat. So when they released the virtual virus at the Pierre Hotel in New York on the 18th of October 2019, simultaneous, same day as the release of a real virus at the Wuhan military games in Hubei province in China, what I think they were doing is celebrating the launch of the BBC on the 18th of October, 1922.
Wow.
Now, isn't that amazing?
Yes.
So what we are establishing, you and I, and let me just say what my goals are for this particular show and what comes next, which is the Patreon part of the show, starting in nearly half an hour, right? I believe you and I, and I'll be arrogant here, are uniquely qualified to teach people how to recognize that they have been caught in a super spreader game, an iterative super spreader game. And by that I mean is what they now have is the technology where they can do gain of function research at certain key Canadian laboratories, controlled directly or indirectly by the Trudeau Foundation. And remember,
Jeez.
that was lifted,
Oh,
if you will. You're amazed, huh?
33-year-old Scottish engineer.
Yes.
David.
Yes. 33. Yes, I know. But we are on the threshold of something extraordinary because you and I are uniquely qualified. And just to remind listeners, you and I were in London in January of last year, having been up to Cambridge to quiz a number of people on interesting developments, including we tried to get to the director, I forget his name, of the Center for Research into the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities, right? Called CRASH. And the reason I wanted to go with you to see this guy is there was news that at the CRASH Center in Cambridge University, they were developing artificial intelligence to detect hate speech. Now, I've spent 40 years in the world of artificial intelligence, and if you program an algorithm or a computer to detect hate speech, you'll put in words that sometimes are hateful, like violation of someone sexually. Now, what the AI will do is take that word, violation, and give it or treat it or apply to it or impute it to a sexual connotation. So if, for example, in an election like last year, people start using the violation of Benford's law, then Facebook has actually withdrawn the privileges of people who look at that because they, presumably using artificial intelligence, treat the word violation as a sexual attack. So it gets pruned, right? So now back to this thread. And remember, you and I had discussed frequently the paper presented at the 1981 International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence, where I was a delegate sent by Schlumberger Doll Research Center because I was the coordinator of artificial intelligence and geoscience research. I didn't attend that presentation, but subsequently we've looked at it. And what we've discovered is the writer, the authors of that article or that presentation were saying that by tracking characters, they can understand narratives. Now, there's a weakness in that from an artificial intelligence point of view. The moment you attach any kind of adjective to an individual, like Justin Trudeau or Pierre Trudeau or Bill Clinton or Bill Gates, all the supporters and fans of those individuals will tune you out if you say nasty things, right? And that's back to that Orwellian comment. The freedom is to be able to say nasty things that people don't want to hear, right? And we need to be able to say nasty things. But what's vitally important, and that I think is yours and my discovery together, is that's less important. Character tracking and the understanding of narratives is far, far less important because of the disputes and debates around someone's character than putting it in reverse. Narrative tracking and the understanding of character is immensely more important. And what you and I can do is we can teach people in this part of the show how important that is, right? And in the second part of the show, we can show people how they can sit down at one of these iterated prisoner's dilemma games, right? And defeat the enemy. And I'm saying, coming back to the title, the enemy is a crime group, a global crime group with trillions of dollars of assets under management, made up of the Trudeau Foundation, the BRICS countries and their diasporas. Now, a diaspora is, for example, a group of Chinese citizens or students who come into an area around the city of Vancouver, which has been set up to trap them and exploit them and turn them around into what I believe now become double agents, right? To go back into China with the tools necessary to reduce the population, or back into Russia, or go back into Brazil.
Wherever.
And the reason why population control is so important, it's been the dream of the Fabians, right, since the end of the 19th century, using this Malthusian logic, which has been discredited many, many times over. But once a socialist, you're always a socialist, right? I'm looking at myself, I can see my mouth right at the center of the screen. I really don't look, my teeth are
Sorry,
absolutely
David.
forward.
People can't necessarily see what's on that screen unless I show it to them. Just very quickly, we've got a question coming from Brian in the comments. It's pretty interesting. Brian is obviously a longtime viewer, possibly followed your work on Able Danger. He's asking, could the QRS-11 chip be in the car that hit Jason, and maybe it was controlled remotely, took control from the driver in the same way Lady Diana's Mercedes might have crashed in the tunnel?
That's an excellent question. And that leads back to this crime group made up of the Trudeau Foundation, right? The BRICS countries and their diasporas, that is to say, the Brazilians, Russians, Indians, Chinese, and South African community in, let's say, up at University of British Columbia or in Vancouver, because these are the people a long way from home. But I can tell you, I can guarantee you, Jason, they're being surveilled and tracked through the technologies we've talked about, including technology from McDonnell Detweiler that I believe used that QRS-11 gyro chip and its instrument approach procedures, right, to control the planes on 911. Now, very interestingly, as you know, McDonnell Detweiler, I'm trying to keep this tight because we can go off with so many names and I don't want to lose people. It's vitally important. But as you know, McDonnell Detweiler has been absorbed into Maxar Technologies, right? And Maxar Technologies, I checked the other day to see what its key shareholders are. And the key shareholders of Maxar, as is the case with Maximus, as is the case with Microsoft, as is the case with Costco and Pfizer, is always some combination of BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street, owning between 15 to 25% of these companies, which gives them de facto control, right? So what I'm saying, and it is believed that by the time these people get to 2028, right, you will actually have control of all America's corporations amongst three powerful groups. So I think, there are other 6 more rows. If you click 6 more rows, I think you'll find BlackRock. Let's Google up. Scroll up there. Top 10.
BlackRock Fund Advisors, 11.19%.
Add Vanguard, that's 23%. Add State Street at 4%, 27%. Those three exchange-traded funds control, right, this company, Maxar.
David, give me just
And
one
Maximus.
second. This sound problem has returned. I'm just going to try something very quick. Just give me 1 second. Clicking should be gone now. I hope.
Okay, so racing on. So what do I mean by the BBC's Superspreader-Century game? I'm saying that the BBC, for 100 years, remember it was founded on the 18th of October, 1922, essentially funded by the people who are manufacturing radios, because you can't sell a radio unless you've got content to put on it. If you substitute internet for radio, fast forward to the present, right? All of the companies involved in internet servicing, including online or internet-enabled television, right,
Yeah.
depend on content in order to be able to sell their services over the internet. And
David,
in fact,
I
in
must
many ways,
apologize for interrupting, but this is so important. I have to bring it to your attention. Mr. Wordsworth is with us on Twitch. And I didn't know this. I presume you do. But the logo for the Fabian Society is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I did know that.
Look at that.
Right.
Sorry, please carry
And
on.
Pierre Trudeau is a Fabian, right? Fast forward to the 1920s, when the BBC is founded, and it would become the world's premier broadcaster of propaganda, news, and entertainment, right? There were multiple Fabians in the elite corners of, let's say, the Five Eyes or the American and the British society. And they believe in eugenics, right? Eugenics, government by a group of elite bureaucrats, and centralized credit. Well, what have you got today? You've got basically rogue viruses and gain of function research through compromised laboratories that are leaking this garbage into the community and culling various sections of the society. When did that start? Well, let's go back to the 1970, right? When Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, and the Chinese Mao Zedong exchanged ambassadors, and so it was starting to be recognized. In 1972, Pierre Trudeau privatized the Connaught Laboratories at the University of Toronto, leaving it free to fractionate dirty prison blood from Arkansas under the umbrella of the Bill Clinton racket down in Arkansas. What did they produce from this fractionated prison blood? They produced a high concentration of plasma laced with HIV and Hep C. These are bioweapons, Jason. And America and the Five Eyes countries should wake up that this guy, Pierre Trudeau, and his hero, Mao Zedong, right, basically installed and created a technology for population control starting at least in 1972. Then Pierre Trudeau, who was in Moscow in 1952 as leader of the Canadian Communist Party, and Bill Clinton, who was in Moscow in 1969 after being expelled from Oxford University Rhodes Scholarship for rape and drug dealing, I believe they conspired together to create a pathogen or a bioweapon that could be taken from prisoners in Arkansas, shipped up through a broker in Montreal, fractionated at Connaught Laboratories in the University of Toronto, and used for population control as one of the tools of population control. Here's another tool. In 1970, the Office of Economic Opportunity, right, began funding a sterilization program where they would pay or deny welfare benefits to poor black women unless they sterilized their daughters. Fast forward through to the 70s. So Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong died in 1976. But then in 1980, women...
They both died in 1976?
Yes. In 1980, it was the beginning of the disappearance of Aboriginal women in Canada, in remote parts of the world. And the BBC did a documentary on it where they said it was believed 4,000 women, Aboriginal women, First Nations women, had been murdered or killed in Canada from 1980 through to the present. And I believe the United Nations said this was, what was it, a crime against humanity? But what I'm getting at is Pierre Trudeau, as a Fabian, is identified with, and his son should be as well, I believe, with eugenics, right, centralized credit, and government by elite bureaucrats. I think this super spreader game that's been set up with the BBC actually allows them to whipsaw the public between mutating viruses, such that as a vaccine is developed to deal with one virus, the reaction of the public is monitored, and then through gain of function research, they modify the virus so it bypasses the vaccine. So we, the world, is getting onto an endless cycle of population control where we're trapped in the conflicting stories coming from two kinds of viruses. One virus is the virtual virus being transmitted through the BBC's technology between mobile to mobile. The other virus is a physical virus that's being transmitted by a carrier employed or hired or unwittingly infected with the virus, such as the recruitment pool available to Maximus, because Maximus basically infiltrates the family and breaks it up. Right, so Maximus picked up a contract, or the outsourcing contract in BC in 2003 to run the family maintenance and enforcement program. And in the United States, it picked up the contract from Bill Clinton's reign, if you will, in the United States to administer the unbelievably evil named Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act. Americans, wake up. You've got these people right in your heart. You've got a criminal organization, the Trudeau Foundation, the BRICS diaspora, and by diaspora, I mean the people who've left Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa for whatever reason, maybe as students. They cluster in Vancouver, which is the global money laundering hub for the BRICS diaspora. Billions of dollars have come out of China, laundered through real estate in Vancouver. The Auditor General has been unable to nail down these crimes because they're so vast. But I think with you, Jason, I've nailed it down, because you can launder a great deal of money, which is one of the RICO predicate offenses, through an $18 trillion exchange traded fund run by those three ETFs, which are major shareholders or controlling shareholders in Boeing, Microsoft, Maximus, Costco, and Pfizer. So what they're doing is they're lending money through this centralized credit, right, into governments who are led by what are in the main socially, scientifically, and technically illiterates, right? And I include Bill Clinton and I include Justin Trudeau in that. And basically, instead of taking a high interest rate, right, they basically pick up a contract for one of their investees, like Pfizer, for 8 million doses of a vaccine, right? So it's a racket. So it's a criminal organization based in Vancouver and set up by a number of people. And I think I now know, with a little check on my past, the mastermind of this scam. And it's David Emerson. Now, just to tell you about David Emerson, he was a director of McDonnell Detweiler in 2000. Right? Mm-hmm. Now,
Is this him?
May of, that's David Emerson, yeah, right. And if you notice his wife, and I have no preconceptions of that, she's Chinese, right?
Where
But
does it
if
tell
you
us
want
that?
to set up a double agent, right? Remember, you need a cover story, right? Teresa Yuexi Tang. And his portfolio included a spell as Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Harper government in Canada. And I'm alleging that this guy is a traitor, that he sold out Canada and the Five Eyes countries. And as the director of McDonnell Dettweiler, he would have commissioned McDonnell Dettweiler to build the instrument approach procedure, final approach procedure software required to take a plane off its regular en route airway and fly through various obstacles, ostensibly, I believe, this was in May of 2001, ostensibly to land a hijacked plane safely. But the same technology, and that's the great problem of artificial intelligence, would work just as well, but totally differently, if the good guy is on the ground, as opposed to the good guy in the cockpit, or vice versa. It depends where the bad guys are. If you wanted to fly these planes like they flew on 911 with great precision, even though Osama bin Laden never had access to pilots who could fly anything like the maneuvers required on 911, essentially I'm saying McDonnell Dettweiler and its exchange-traded fund shareholders controlled the 911 attack. And instead of looking in Afghanistan, where we should have been looking, is in British Columbia. Now, I met David Emerson. I was with my friend Ron Gamble, who's the founder of the BC Reform Party, where I became the leader. We were invited to a barbecue along Zero Avenue. A senator, I forget the name.
I hope not at a pig farm.
No, this was around August of 2009. And Ron Gamble, my buddy, knew Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada, very well. And I was standing beside Ron, and Harper, with his security detail, came around a corner. And I said it in a very loud voice. I would think probably 200 people heard it. I said, Prime Minister, there is a threat to the Winter Olympics, incidentally organized by David Emerson.
The Winter Olympics were, or the threat was?
The threat, the Winter Olympics was organized by David Emerson, right? The threat, I believe, was coming from the use of McDonnell Dettweiler's technology to fly a plane into the opening or closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. So I had built a file on McDonnell Dettweiler, and
how did you know that?
As I shout, what?
How did you know that threat?
I gave it to Harper. Well, I'm guessing this is August of 2009. The Winter Olympics started, I think, February 2010, right? So this is about 6 months before the start of the Winter Olympics. But I had been tracking McDonnell Dettweiler, and in particular, the technology used to fly the planes on 911, which I believe emanated from McDonnell Dettweiler under a contract, I think, arranged with David Emerson.
Well, right? David, here is an archive of davidemerson.ca, the guy's personal webpage, which ceased operation after 2008. So that's interesting. Gung Hei Fat Choi, I'm delighted to extend my heartfelt greetings to everyone celebrating Chinese New Year. He's talking about responsible leadership in Canada, universal child care plan. Right. So anyway, I gave the file to Stephen Harper, right? And he took it. He acknowledged Ron, and Ron introduced me to Harper, right? The Prime Minister, then the Prime Minister of Canada. And this, I think, is the period when David Emerson was Minister of Foreign Affairs, whatever, it doesn't matter. So what I was saying to Stephen Harper, and I spoke very loudly to make sure a whole bunch of other people, I said, there's a threat to the Winter Olympics, right? What I conceived was that there would be an attack from the air on an opening or closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics to cause, obviously, total chaos. So what happened a week before the opening day of the Winter Olympics? A certain gentleman was arrested and charged with murders.
and that is Russell Williams. Right? Now, Russell Williams, he was in charge of airborne security for the Winter Olympics. He's a Canadian Air Force officer, a fast tracker. And he was arrested for murdering a number of women involved with the Canadian Air Force, right? So 7 days before, I believe, the possibility had been launched, he was preemptively arrested, in my opinion, because of what I'd said to Harper. They knew that they couldn't actually go ahead with the attack. Can't prove it, right? But it's a reasonable supposition. At that same barbecue, I went up to David Emerson, who'd given a speech, and I said to him, were you a director of McDonald Detweiler during the 9/11 attack? I tell you, he nearly fainted.
Tell us that again. You asked him if he was the director of McDonald
Detweiler. A director of McDonald Detweiler during the 9/11 attack. He was, a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer, but you always ask questions where you know the answer.
Right.
Right. And I don't even remember what he said, but he was practically speechless. And he went very pale, and I thought he was going to faint.
And that question was posed to this guy?
David Emerson.
Yeah. Where's his website? Huh.
Okay, now David Emerson. I believe he's the mastermind of the pandemic and the 9/11 attack, and more particularly, the BBC's Superspreader games, which go back Superspreader-Century game, because I believe the BBC's Superspreader-Century game goes back to 1918. The BBC was founded in 1922, but in 1918, there was a breakout of what maybe we can persuade people to start calling the Kentucky flu instead of the Spanish flu. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but they've done the tracking of the virus, and apparently the source of the virus originally was in a US Army training encampment or whatever, prior to these young Americans being shipped off to World War I to die in the trenches. Now, what else is, let me just remind myself, David Emerson, he is a director of the Trudeau Foundation, right?
Really?
He was Deputy Minister of Finance in British Columbia when they set up the Family Maintenance Enforcement Program, which was subsequently in 2003 outsourced to Maximus, right? He's the CAI Special Advisor in 2008. Now, remember CAI Private Equity Group? You and I have often thought that it might actually be code for CIA. Maybe it is. Yeah. When I heard of it first, it was Canadian American investors. But it's highly like they took a stake in McDonald Detweiler prior to the 9/11 attack, where McDonald Detweiler was commissioned, I believe, by David Emerson to develop the instrument approach procedure necessary to take a plane off its regular en route airway and line it up for the final approach run into the target. So I think the 9/11 conspiracy was developed in British Columbia by these criminal organizations, which is the Trudeau Foundation, right? The BRICS diaspora, using Vancouver as the money laundering capital of the world, and Maximus, which is the controlling shareholders of BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. But the interesting thing about Maximus is it operates an extortion racket within the family to break it up, where money is taken from one side of the family, most often the absent father, or withheld from the mother on the basis that unless she hands off her children into this racket, right, she is denied her welfare benefits. So what was Justin Trudeau doing? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just want to point something out to you that I think is quite interesting to observe. You were mentioning that, Pierre Trudeau and Bill Clinton, they did this whole thing with the fractionated blood. And the thing that I always like to try to do is to just find a picture of, whoever it might be. Pierre Trudeau is not shy about meeting with U.S. presidents, former U.S. presidents. I'm surprised that it's not been possible for me to find a picture of Pierre Trudeau with Bill Clinton. And now when I Google Bill Clinton, Justin Trudeau, there is not a single picture of those two guys together. I find that strange.
Well, I don't, because I think you put Pierre Trudeau and Bill Clinton together, and that immediately focuses on one of the great crimes of the last century, which is the fractionating the prison blood, right, and creating a plasma laced with Hep C and HIV that injured millions and killed thousands, right? And those two are responsible. The buck's got to stop somewhere.
I mean, that's what I mean. The lack of a photo of them together is, to me, a conspicuous suggestion that it might be deliberately happening that way.
Yeah, you don't want dogs. You want dogs not barking, right?
Right.
And that's one of the interesting things. But let me just get back, because we're short of time. What I want to tell
yes.
the public, right, is that you and I are uniquely qualified to recognize how the public, we the people, including the people from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who are being targeted here, you and I are probably uniquely qualified to reverse engineer, if that's the right word, an iterated BBC Superspreader-Century game, which is going on as we speak. And the iterated BBC Superspreaders-Century game involves using gain-of-function research to engineer bioweapons at one or more of these labs, preferably from the Canadian point of view, at the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab, where I believe that woman who was escorted off the premises, she carried with her students, maybe they'd been vaccinated, I don't know, they carried COVID-19 into Wuhan City to create a fake decoy where Trump would be tricked, or various other people may be tricked into saying, this is a Chinese virus. It's not a Chinese virus. It's a Canadian virus, right? And remember, just to touch on the importance of Barry Sherman. Barry Sherman was murdered on the 13th of December, 2017. He would have been an extraordinarily powerful whistleblower because he knew all about the patent thickets of Big Pharma. He had to be removed. He was removed brutally, right? Almost a ritual killing, but I won't dwell on that. On the 21st of December, 2017, the moratorium on funding gain-of-function research was lifted, leaving the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg to start work and be funded by, I believe, these ETFs in the creation of a coronavirus, 19. Right? In 2018, the year after Barry Sherman was killed, the BBC produces this documentary. And this, I think, is vitally important, if I can just convey this to people. There are two kinds of viruses in circulation, right? One is a virtual virus circulating in BBC cyberspace, right? Where a signal is transmitted to another mobile, for example, which now registers that it has been infected. But that virtual virus that has been transmitted with a signal is not a real virus. It does not obey the laws of physics. Now, the real virus, let's say the one carried by the woman escorted off the premises, obeys the laws of physics. And the law of physics, in which I incorporated in my object-oriented fractal paintbrush, the one that really matters is everything. You, a virus, a pathogen, a weapon, a knife, a gun, right, moves along a path according to the least average difference between potential and kinetic energy. And that's a long-winded way of saying, when Dr. Hannah Fry in that documentary said, I am a patient zero, the spread of the virus in Wuhan City is not consistent with a patient zero virus that's jumped out of the bat soup, because a patient zero virus that jumps out of the bat soup, the protein spikes are not adjusted, it's like a lock and key, to the human infected party. So it doesn't spread quickly. Right? Patient zero viruses do not spread quickly. But in Wuhan City, you saw an outbreak allegedly around the food market. And I'm saying that would be consistent with a team of Canadian athletes or their trainers having been vaccinated against COVID-19 that came out of that lab, going into the food market and spreading the infection around. So you create the impression it's a Chinese virus when I think, in fact, it's a Canadian virus.
Now, David, I need to stop you there, unfortunately, because we do need to make the transition over to our sponsor exclusive segment. People are going to be able to watch the continuation of this conversation. We're going to go into even more depth on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I want to thank everybody who's watching. I want to encourage people to share this video on your favorite social media site. Email it to friends. We're really being suppressed by a variety of different means, and we look forward to seeing everybody on the sponsor exclusive segment in less than 5 minutes. See everybody there. Thanks for watching.